the panel I'd like to invite up onto the stage now that's going to be discussing closing the education to employment gap is Alan Blue, who is the co-founder and vice president of product management at LinkedIn, Robert Mendenhall, who is president of the Western Governors University, and Susan Lund, who's a partner at McKinsey Global Institute. And the topic really is about this sort of increasingly widely discussed perceived problem of, is there a gap between the skills that universities are teaching and the skills that employers want in this increasingly rapidly changing and demanding global economy. And I wanted to start, Susan, with you, as you've done a lot of studying of this. To what extent is this a real problem, and how, and where is the problem worse, and what should be done about it?
I think it is a real problem. Economists love to play parlor games and debate, is there really a skills gap? And the evidence that they point to is that wages aren't increasing. Overall, the median wage, the average wage for lots of occupations. And they say if there was a skills gap, then there's a shortage of labor and wages should be bid up. And because that's not happening, ergo, there's no skills gap. However, I work at the McKinsey Global Institute, part of the global consulting firm, so I spend a lot of time with companies. And when you talk to any business executive, there is clearly a skills gap. Now, it's complex. There's the well-known shortage of software engineers and programmers. But it's really pervasive. I hear from oil companies, they can't find welders who could work on an offshore oil rig. And if they could find those people, they're earning 6 figures off the bat. Part of what's happened in the United States is a shift away from sort of 2-year technical skill programs. And so now we've got a shortage of people with mechatronics degrees that can work in advanced manufacturing, shortages of electricians and welders. So from a business perspective, there's no question that there are very specific skills that businesses can't train that they're not finding.
And I mean, to what extent is this a shifting demand issue, and to what extent is it a supply side problem, do you think?
I think it's the disconnect between the two. When you look at the business world, even over the last 30 years or 20 years, and you think about how radically and rapidly it's evolved, think back to the 1980s, for those of you in the room old enough to think back, to how people thought about careers and jobs. They went to one company, they worked for life. Layoffs, if they occurred, were temporary. You were told to sit at home for a few months and then you waited for the phone call to go back to the same company. The business world is just evolving incredibly rapidly, dynamically. When layoffs come now, companies very systematically weed out the lowest performers, and those people are never going to be invited back. And then you look at what's happening on the supply side, education, that's hardly changed in 100 years. We go through 12 years, and then you can go for 2 more years or 4 more years. So education comes in these, increments measured mainly by time, a little bit by achievement, and it takes a long time. So I think it's the disconnect between how rapidly the business world has evolved and what's happened on the education side.
Now, Alan, you have this vast database of hundreds. How many people now on LinkedIn?
380 million.
380 million people, all presumably to some extent at least interested in the possibility of finding a different job, and
of course,
many of them very actively looking for other jobs. But to what extent is a skills gap evident in what you see there?
So we do see it in the data to a certain extent, but mainly, as Susan said, we see it a lot from employers. What employers are actually able to attract. They talk about having massive 100,000, 500,000 person gaps in terms of the people they actually need to hire. And that actually sort of centers in we found in 4 big areas. So one is oil and energy. A second one is healthcare. A third one is advanced manufacturing. And a fourth is the general sort of IT technical skill foundation, which is actually a part of every industry now. I think that's actually the basic message, is that to a certain extent, every job, and especially every job that in the middle skills area, is now a technology job, whether you want it to be or not. So the set of skills you need is literally different than what the previous generation had to have in order to do that work.
And to what extent is the actual skill of trying to find another job also a barrier. 'Cause I do occasional influencer columns for LinkedIn, and I notice, as you jealously compare the people who get 500,000 hits.
Yes.
I mean, it's something like 3 things never to say in a job interview, and that's there seems to be a huge appetite for that kind of basic information and skill set. But is that sort of the general sense of how do I even go about thinking about finding a career and so forth? Is that actually something where people are in the dark a bit at the moment?
Absolutely. I mean, everybody, and it doesn't really matter where you go. I mean, even if you're going to the most elite university, the chances that you're prepared to actually make the transition from your university to the world of work is very small. Everyone I know who graduated really didn't have any idea what they were doing. There are just some people who could approach it with more confidence, primarily because they had people in their lives who were there to help them. Most people, however, don't have that person in their lives. And when you look at a high school guidance counselor who has 1,000 students to deal with at any one time, or you look at a college sort of career center where basically it's a highly underutilized resource, there's a lot of people who are proceeding with a tremendous number of questions into that transition.
Now, Robert, just tell us a bit about the Western Governors University and the history of it, but also to what extent you're finding this skills gap is sort of a real motivating force for you.
We were really created by governors to address the skills gap in a little bit of a different way, certainly to develop degrees that are workforce-based, but the governors, frankly, were hearing from employers, this is 15, 16 years ago, look, we hire the graduates from your institutions and then we spend 6 months and $50,000 training them to do something. Couldn't we link what higher education teaches to what we really need? The unique part about WGU is that it's a competency-based institution. So rather than measuring time, we actually work with employer councils to define what competencies they expect of a graduate. We define the competencies, the measures of the competencies. We teach those competencies. Students graduate when they've mastered them, independent of how long it takes them. So we have employer councils for each of our degrees, and we basically say to employers, so what is it you expect a graduate with this degree to know and be able to do? And specifically, what is it they can't do that you wish they could do? And there's never a long silence after that question. They have a long list. And then we seek to teach those competencies. So
what are the changes that you've seen over the last few years, and where are the really hot areas where you're focusing at the moment?
Well, so we do bachelor's and master's degrees, but in 4 areas. So we do teacher education, primarily STEM teaching. So we actually graduated 15% of all the master's prepared math and science teachers in the whole country last year, and 5% of all the bachelor's prepared math and science teachers. We do nursing. So we're going to need 1 million new nurses in the next 10 years. IT workers, so across the spectrum of IT, and then business is kind of the catch-all for other things. But just as an example, we worked with Cedars-Sinai to develop the nursing program. They have an internship program where they take a college graduate and they spend 6 months basically as an internship before they'll put them on the floor. We cut that in half with our graduates, so they need less time to master the competencies to be independent on the floor. So that's the basic model, but it fundamentally changes higher education. So we have no schedules, right? We start a student, they can go at their own pace. It really recognizes that students come to higher ed knowing different things and they learn at different rates. So why would we have a system that says every class takes 4 months and when you're done, we'll give you an A, B, C, or D depending on how much you learned, whether you've mastered it or
And where have you seen the strongest increase in demand from students in the last year or so?
Typically when we talk about higher education, we always think of the traditional age student, which is now less than half of higher education. Our target really is the 37 million adults in America with some college and no degree. It's 23% of the US workforce. Already in the workforce, their jobs are largely going away or dead-end jobs, and they've got another 20 or 30 years in the workforce. And our higher ed system isn't set up to take these people who have to work full-time and upskill them and educate them to gain the competencies they really need for the workforce over the next 20 years.
Now, LinkedIn obviously is evolving very fast from being essentially a sort of a bulletin board for people and a matched marketplace for people seeking jobs into something that's a platform for personal and professional development.
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing? What are you seeing in terms of the demand from LinkedIn members for skill development, and how are you responding to that?
So inevitably, and I can entirely agree, there's a gigantic number of people out there who are at a place in their lives where they need to either re-enter the workforce or they need to reskill for a different kind of career. And among those people, we're seeing a tremendous amount of demand for information. What do I actually need to learn first? And then how do I actually go about learning it? So part of it is this year, LinkedIn purchased lynda.com, Lynda, the online learning platform. And a big part of that is so that we can essentially make some of that training directly available to people who are looking for acquiring specific skills on their way to particular kinds of jobs. But more directly for us, in terms of starting a whole new career, we completely believe that the relationship between the educator and the employer is the key one. We believe that educators can be extremely responsive to what the market actually needs. And because that's the case, we're trying to basically remove all the barriers to that reaction. So in partnership with the Markle Foundation, as well as ASU, who's one of your sponsors for this event, and edX, in the beginning of 2016, we're going to be releasing a product called Rework America Connected, which in Denver and Phoenix. The basic idea of this is that we want to build essentially a clearinghouse which allows employers and educators to work together to drive great outcomes for individuals moving into the world of work. And the way that's going to work is that an individual educator is going to say, here are the programs I offer, and employers are going to say, these are the programs that we hire from. So that basically I, as a job seeker, have direct and complete knowledge about the kinds of courses or the kinds of programs I can take in order to pursue a particular role or a particular career in the future. So basically trying to remove sort of, if you will, an abstraction layer, which has always existed, where there's no direct tie between the degree you have and the outcome you get. We're trying to close that gap in order to close the skills gap at large. So we're going to try that out.
And you've done a pilot in New York as well, have you? Or?
So we've done some different stuff in New York. So we actually worked here with the city, talking to Mayor de Blasio. He created something called the Tech Talent Pipeline, which was spending $10 million on how to create tech talent in the city and then retain it in the city. And basically we worked with them, providing a lot of data analysis about the kinds of institutions which are actually producing tech talent here in the city, the kinds of companies that are hiring and retaining that tech talent here, as a way of allowing the mayor to apply that $10 million as intelligently as possible. It's actually gone and had an impact on the way they're designing STEM curriculum in the K through 12 system.
So Susan, how do we connect supply and demand more effectively, and particularly how do we, how do we create this virtual circle of information from employers about what they're going to need in the future to the institutes that are providing the skills education?
Well, the key right now is to scale it up. You can look across the United States and find lots of great pilot programs. WGU, the Rework America initiative. You can look at Delta Airlines has been working for 10 years or more with Clayton State University in Georgia. They have a 2-year degree in airline management and a 4-year degree, and they also have a Delta reservations call center on the campus so students can work and study and learn to be a reservation agent. And you can look at, in Michigan, there are automotive manufacturers working with community colleges to develop the curriculum for 2-year mechatronics degrees so that kids can work in high-end factories, which is basically all robotics and computer-based these days. But the problem is that none of it is scaled. So,
and why is that, do you think?
I think it really does come down to a lack of coordinated policy. I mean, for one thing, the U.S. educational system by design is incredibly fragmented. The federal government has relatively little say. It goes down to states and then even local counties and communities. And so what you find is, especially as you get away from the elite 4-year universities and then the big state 4-year universities down to 2-year community colleges, there are tens of thousands of them. Their performance is radically different. There are very good ones, and there are ones that frankly are not educating students, costing a lot, and not preparing students. So I don't know what the solution is for a country like the United States where we really cherish local control over these things, and how you move from very successful examples to getting.
But do you think that's? I mean, it's one of the issues that the examples aren't well known across the country. I mean,
I think there's
normally there is. I find in America, if something suddenly becomes hot, then a lot of people say, "Oh, yeah, we should be doing that."
It's true that this, hotbed of local experimentation should be publicized better. WGU, for instance, other programs. I think that online talent platforms is our nomenclature for what we call LinkedIn and other platforms like it. The important thing about these is that they're generating real-time data and mountains of data very specifically on which jobs are posted. I'll brag for LinkedIn. LinkedIn facilitated 1 million job hires in 2014. And roughly 1 out of every 2 working-age Americans has a profile on LinkedIn. So this is generating vast amounts of data on where do people go to school, what does their career path look like, how do they move within companies and across companies, what jobs are being posted. So for instance, the example of what tech skills does New York City need. So I think that we're on the verge of being able to harvest this vast amount of data online to get much better, more granular answers of what skills are needed, and then hopefully using these platforms to publicize the successes.
And what about you at the Governor's University? What do you do to work out what employers are actually going to want?
Yeah, I think what we found is it's not all that unique by individual locales. I mean, we're now 60,000 students in every state in America. Frankly, the requirements for teachers are the same across states. There's a few local variations. The competencies needed for nurses are really the same, whether you're working in New York or California, and very much the same with IT and business. So it really isn't that hard to figure out the needs that employers have. I mean, we bring together a group of employers and we ask them. And they say, these are the things we're missing, and this is what we'd like your graduates to know and be able to do. We now have the technology capability to both teach that and assess that. So the assessments of these competencies are some combination of objective tests and projects and portfolios and simulations. Obviously, our teachers do student teaching in classrooms across the country. Our nurses do clinical rotations in hospitals. But that's really just ultimately a big competency test about whether they've learned the skills they need to learn. I think Susan's right. There's a lot of little innovations going on in the country. I think WGU sort of beyond the experiment stage at this point. We're one of the biggest 5 universities in the country and still growing 20% a year. Obviously, it's still a small, 60,000 out of 37 million adults. We have a long ways to go in the higher education system generally of making it more responsive to workforce needs.
So I want to, before we go over to the audience for questions, to ask one question which is slightly sort of more fundamental and philosophical about where the world is heading, because I think there is a growing awareness that the global economy is becoming rapidly much more integrated, and at the same time, your friends in Silicon Valley are basically coming up with all sorts of machine learning and software that some people think are going to wipe out 90% of middle-class professional jobs as we know it over the next 10 years. So how do you advise higher education institutions to think about the sort of dynamic change and to this global and maybe much lower employment scenario if you buy the doom mongers? How do you prepare for that, and what should they be thinking about as they look 10 years ahead? Alan, I'm going to start with you.
I'm not going to worry too much about doom mongering. I think we've got a lot of work. I think personally that we have a lot of work that we got to get done now. I think there is actually a major technological impact which is happening to people who had middle class roles. That's happening already. We talk about the terms like hollowing out the middle class. A whole bunch of things which basically are pulling jobs, if you will, to the polls. So pulling responsibilities away from the strong middle and into lower skilled work and then very high skilled work. People who are in the middle group need to figure out a way to jump one direction or the other. So when I think about the kinds of things that I would like to prepare our members for, people who are using LinkedIn in order to be able to plan a career and have a great outcome for themselves, for their families, I want them to understand what the options actually are that are out there and see the paths which actually get there so they can make an intelligent choice. But I want to make sure they have the tools they need to actually get where they're going. And the only way that's going to work is when, whether LinkedIn is acting as the platform or not, when an educator and an employer and an individual can basically work together more actively to change and roll with this amazing transformation which is occurring right now. I think it's an entirely navigable problem, but we need to take advantage of some of that data, and we need to drive a bunch of innovation in the way education works to make sure it's really responding and playing its role in that ecosystem.
Susan, I know McKinsey's Global Institute has certainly expressed fears about the big sort of job destruction phase that's coming up.
It's true that automation is encroaching on ever higher end jobs, legal jobs, etc. But I'm not.
And in that context, I mean, is it going to be worth people investing in a 3 or 4 year degree? I mean, should we be going for just doing courses to give us the expertise we need for some job we're going to have for a couple of years and then move on?
Well, now you've opened up a different philosophical point, which is what's the value of education? Is it just getting a credential for a job, or is it learning more broadly? I won't touch that. I'm not pessimistic. I think that this issue of automation of higher end jobs will continue inevitably, but I'm optimistic for 2 reasons. One is demographics. When we look forward, many countries have aging populations, including China. China's workforce today is already shrinking year on year. The one-child policy is now taking a bite, and so this vast entrance of nearly 1 billion people into the global workforce is now subsiding. Italy, Japan, Korea, Brazil, Germany. You look around the world, even the US, I mean, we have relatively good demographics, but when you look over the next 50 years, the size of the global labor force is going to grow very little. So when you look back 50 years, global GDP growth came half from increasing the number of people working and half from what we call productivity, or the amount that each person produces. Looking forward, the global labor force is barely expanding. So unless we get some big revolution in productivity, it means global growth is smaller. So long term, I think what we're going to be talking about is too few workers, not too many.
Yeah, but then you've got all these robots that are coming along to do the work.
Well, then
who's going to be working as a Delta check-in agent in 10 years' time? I mean, it's, that may be a great program today, but it's hard to imagine it's still going to be around in future.
Well, so then you get down to the point of there's a short-term gap, but the other reason that I'm optimistic is historical. There's a great essay that John Maynard Keynes wrote in 1930, and it's called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. And when I give PowerPoint presentations, I often start with a quote, and it seems like something you'd pick up and read in the paper today. He's talking about how automation is doing away with all these jobs, and will there be enough work for people to do? And he actually mused that labor would become so productive we would only have to work 15 hours a week. And at McKinsey, we joke, he meant 15 hours a day, but...
So let's take some
questions. Jobs came that he couldn't foresee, that none of us could foresee. And so service jobs, now I think there's an issue of the quality of jobs and the pay and how we distribute income of labor in this country. We've got high inequality, so jobs like somebody working at a Delta reservation line, I mean, what is that worth and what should they be paid? That's a different distributional issue.
So we have a question down the front there. I think a microphone will come to you. Here we go. And if you'd say who you are.
And we learned in the last panel not to ignore the app questions.
Yeah, I'm going to bring that in as well, please.
I'm not an app.
Not yet.
He's a person.
Max Blow, I'm Wilfrid Laurier, University, Canada. I want to challenge the premise here. This is a very educator-focused kind of discussion, but what's the role of the employers? In Canada, we've seen a drop by almost more than half in the past 15 years of employers spending on training. So really, to me, there seems to be a shift from the employer educating or training for the job to the education system actually being expected to train for that first job. In fact, I I quite reject that premise.
So is there a
think we
question? Is there a question?
I think I'd like to have your views on whether education should be for the first job or the next job if you're losing a job, or is it really to educate more broadly, to be adaptable, to be ready for the job that's 10 years down the road that isn't even conceived of today? And
just so I'm paying attention to the app, a related question is, the company sector are far too short-term orientated on their results, and this app person raises the possibility, where will this lead? The belated burial of capitalism.
It's
so,
very
Alan, Robert, you go first. You've not spoken for a minute.
Well, I don't think it's an either or. I think, universities resist the idea of we're training for a job. We're training the whole person, and we're training for citizenship and so on. And then you ask students why they're going to school, and it's like, for a job. That's my first reason, second reason, and third reason, I need a job. So they're not inconsistent. When we talk about competency-based education, people say, well, you're just training individual job skills. When you talk to employers about the competencies they're missing, it's like people who can write, people who can do critical thinking, people who can do problem solving. It's all the things we claim to do in higher education, but employers are telling us we're not doing. Telling statistic, a recent study, 96% of provosts said they were doing a good job preparing people for the workforce. 11% of business leaders thought their graduates were prepared for the workforce. There's this huge disconnect, and part of it is because we allow faculty essentially to teach whatever they want, whatever the name of the course is. So you take XYZ course from 3 different faculty members, you'll learn 3 different things. So the employers have no idea, even for the same degree from the same institution, what that person actually has learned and can do and what they're able to do in the job. And until we link a little more tightly what a graduate knows and can do, higher ed really isn't serving the employers very well.
We've got a question in the middle here.
I would only add just really, I'm sorry.
Well, let's take the
I would only add just really quickly to the question around employers. One of the amazing things about this is that employers feel this pinch extremely strongly for the jobs on the other side of the skills gap they can't hire. We see companies out there that are doing everything possible to provide the, like for instance, everything possible to provide the training. LinkedIn, we've done this, we've basically done a deal with a group called Year Up, which is an alternative mechanism for teaching people to do IT skills. Takes Opportunity Youth, trains them for a year. Those people cost $40,000 a year to train. LinkedIn has now trained 75 of them through that process because we need to be able to hire those people. When you have a strong need, companies will invest in making that happen. For anybody who's on the other side of the skills gap, you suddenly go from not being in demand and not being valued by a company to being in demand and being valued, and therefore people will spend money on your continued training. So as the skills change, companies must invest and are already investing. So it does actually push both directions.
Yeah, question there.
Sure, so this is picking
Please say who you are.
Lindsay Pincus from an organization called Achieve that works in the K-12 space at the policy level. Matthew, the second half of your question earlier was about these course-by-course opportunities like Linda, and there's an emerging marketplace of similar kinds of opportunities for learners at all ages. Mm-hmm. But we're at the beginning of this sort of wild, wild west where the learners have to navigate that environment. There's not a sense or stamp of quality, and employers are not yet at scale validating or certifying that they will accept those opportunities as a statement of preparedness. So where do you see this marketplace going in terms of from the wild, wild west to disappearing or getting more organized, or that's the end of the question?
Susan.
I think it will get more organized. I think that we have this evolving ecosystem of digital platforms that enable people to learn throughout their career, whether they're young people K through 12 or mid-career. And I think that some industry groups like the National Association of Manufacturers has developed a set of credentials that are widely recognized. But I think it is a big issue, and I think there's a lot of on-the-job learning as well that happens when people want to switch mid-career. If they've been a welder or an electrician, they have a set of skills, but they have no way of demonstrating to another employer what they can do. And so I think this issue of credentialing and having them widely accepted is important.
Let me just add, I think the role ultimately of higher education is to measure and credential learning, not to provide all of it. Students can now get learning in lots of different places. This whole competency-based system we're talking about essentially says you can measure those competencies, you can credential them, and you can micro-credential them, you can credential them into degrees, but ultimately it'll be measuring credential learning.
Okay, we had another question in the middle, and that'll be our last question from the audience.
Yeah, hi, I'm Fiona Hollins from Teachers College, and this is a question primarily for Robert. So earlier on, a lot of people were asking about soft skills and where that comes from, how you teach that, and some suggestion that perhaps liberal arts education is where a lot of that can come from. But you're teaching CBE, and I'm wondering whether employers find that the graduates of CBE programs have more or less soft skills than those who graduate from a regular 4-year or 2-year program.
So we survey employers every year. We have Gallup and Nielsen survey employers. Our employers actually report that our students have higher levels of soft skills than the graduates they're hiring from other places. We also have our students do the collegiate learning assessment, which purports to measure those kinds of liberal arts.
Why do you think they're higher level of soft skills?
I think two things. I think one, recognizing that our students' average age is 37. They've been in the workforce, so they're not 22-year-olds. But we think of competencies as only being workforce competencies. We're very explicit about teaching and practicing those kinds of competencies as part of the curriculum. So for example, writing, which is a really key skill, is just woven throughout the entire curriculum. It doesn't matter what course you're in, you're going to have to write in that course. So it's not a writing course, it can be a course in anything. You've got to be able to communicate the results of that course. We do the same thing with communication and working in teams. All of our students are part of learning communities. Our students report higher engagement with faculty than students on brick and mortar campuses because they're interacting electronically all the time.
Alan, I don't want to trespass too much on the next panel, but I mean, you're doing a lot of sort of informal credentialing on LinkedIn in the sense people recommending each other and all that sort of thing. Where do you see that fitting into the question we just had?
So this is people endorsing each other for skills. We think it's a real thing. We think there really is signal in that, but we can see the signal in those endorsements. With the project that we're doing in Phoenix and Denver, basically employers will be doing the endorsing of individual programs that educators are actually producing as a way of getting direct, if you will, evidence. In other words, people voting with their dollars. In other words, they're hiring dollars about which programs actually work. To the point around the question about, is it the Wild West? I think the answer is, we now have the ability to build reputation systems for these things at scale. And therefore, I think the wilder the better. The more innovation that we end up with in this space, the more people trying different approaches, the more chance that we're going to be able to roll with the punches the next 15 to 30 years bring us.
Okay, to wrap up, I want to ask each of you, basically in a sentence, to say, as you look at the current trends in supply and demand, and the employment skills gap, what is the number one priority you think people who run higher education institutes should be thinking about at the moment? And Susan, I'll start with you.
Employers.
Connecting with employers.
Connecting with employers on what they need.
Robert?
I think it's really hard for traditional higher ed to change the system they have, but ultimately, technology is causing the disruption. Technology has to provide the solution that allows us to both measure what people know and can do and to individualize the instruction to each student rather than a one-size-fits-all education.
And lastly, Alan.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think the two of those are exactly the right thing. There are so many signals that you can follow right now in terms of what your individual students need and want to achieve and what the world they're going out into wants. If you can listen to both of those things and make changes based on what you hear, you're going to be doing great work.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank the panel for a really stimulating discussion. Thank you.